Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a timeline so twisted, so utterly rewritten, that even the most seasoned historians would probably clutch the ancient papyrus scrolls in disbelief. We're plunging headfirst into the Ides of March, 44 BC, a day that, in our world, carved itself into the very fabric of time with the brutal efficiency of a Roman dagger. You're there, standing on the fringes of the Roman Senate House, the Curia of Pompey, the air thick with the scent of burning lamps and an undercurrent of nervous energy. You see the esteemed senators gather, their togas rustling like restless ghosts, and then you spot him, Gaius Julius Caesar, striding in, seemingly impervious to the whispers, the glares, the palpable tension that hangs heavier than a Roman banquet after a long day of speeches. In our history, this is where the knives came out, where a meticulously planned betrayal extinguished the brightest star in the Roman firmament. But tonight, dear listener, imagine a tiny, almost imperceptible shift. A flicker of movement catches a guard's eye, a slightly misaimed thrust, a sudden, unexpected lurch from Caesar as he perhaps stumbles on a loose paving stone, or maybe, just maybe, one of his famous epileptic fits briefly causes him to collapse, deflecting a blow that would otherwise have been fatal. You probably won't survive this, but you'll witness a world turn on a dime. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The initial chaos erupts exactly as it did in our timeline. You hear the shouts, the gasps, the sickening thuds as bodies collide. Brutus, Cassius, and a legion of conspirators surge forward, their daggers flashing like malevolent fireflies in the dim light. Caesar is surrounded, overwhelmed, a flurry of blows raining down. You see him stagger, his toga soaked not just with sweat, but with the dark, blossoming stains of betrayal. But then, a subtle deviation. One conspirator, perhaps panicked by the sheer audacity of their act, or perhaps distracted by a loyal slave's shriek, misjudges his aim. Instead of the fatal plunge into Caesar's heart, the blade glances off a rib, a painful, shocking wound, but not immediately mortal. Caesar, a man who had faced down entire armies, let out a roar of pain and surprise, a primal sound that silences the room for a split second. This isn't the calm, dignified collapse of a man accepting his fate. This is the furious, cornered beast fighting back. The sheer shock of his survival, of his continued struggle, throws the conspirators into disarray. They had expected a swift, decisive act, not a protracted wrestling match with a wounded legend. A Praetorian guard, who in our history would have been caught off guard or held back by the chaos, now hears that roar. He sees his general, his emperor-in-waiting, still standing, still fighting, albeit wounded. His training kicks in. He draws his gladius, and with a guttural cry of "Loyalty!" Zrение on бросается в бой, один человек против дюжины убийц. This unexpected intervention, this spark of desperate loyalty, is the key. The conspirators, many of them senators themselves, were not hardened killers. They were politicians with daggers, relying on surprise and numbers. The sight of a loyal guard, then another and another, breaking through the terrified throng, begins to sow panic. The sheer audacity of their plot is now their undoing. You see them falter, their faces paling from righteous fervour to stark terror. Brutus, renowned for his stoicism, hesitates, his famous "You too, son?" line never leaving his lips, because Caesar is still breathing, still fighting, still alive. Within minutes, the Curia descends from an assassination attempt to a desperate melee. The few loyalists present, invigorated by Caesar's continued resistance rally. Some conspirators, realizing their plan has gone horribly awry, attempt to flee. But the Praetorian Guard, now alerted by the prolonged commotion, are pouring through the doors, their armoured boots echoing ominously on the marble floor. They secure the building, trapping the senators inside. The air crackles with fear, no longer just for Caesar, but for everyone. Caesar, bleeding but very much alive, collapses into the arms of his horrified guards. He's gravely wounded, yes, perhaps with a dozen non-fatal stab wounds, but the one intended for his heart missed its mark. He glares at the retreating figures of Brutus and Cassius, his eyes burning with an intensity that would haunt their dreams for the rest of their short lives. This man, who had always played the benevolent conqueror, the forgiving victor, is now a man utterly transformed by profound betrayal. The gentle sarcasm that occasionally punctuated his remarks is gone, replaced by an icy resolve. The immediate aftermath is swift and brutal. The Senate, still cowering, is locked down. No one leaves. Every senator is a suspect. You hear the shouts of the Praetorian Guard as they systematically identify and apprehend those who participated in the plot. Some are caught with daggers still in hand. Others, like Brutus and Cassius, manage to slip out in the initial chaos, but their faces are known, their crime undeniable. Caesar, even as he's rushed to his nearby house for urgent medical attention, issues commands through gritted teeth. Find them, all of them, and make an example. This is where the true horror for the Republic begins. In our timeline, the assassination plunged Rome into years of civil war, a chaotic vacuum of power that Octavian eventually filled. Here, the vacuum is brief, instantly filled by an enraged, vengeful Caesar. The conspirators, whether caught red-handed or identified by terrified witnesses, face summary execution. There is no trial, no pretense of justice. This isn't just about punishing the guilty, it's about sending an unequivocal message. Historians still debate whether Caesar, even in our own timeline, truly intended to restore the Republic or merely use its dying embers to legitimize his absolute rule. Here, that debate is rendered moot. His survival, his near-death experience at the hands of the very institution he had outwardly championed, shatters any illusion of Republican collaboration. He had offered clemency after Pharsalus, he had forgiven his enemies, he had tried to integrate them, and for that they had tried to murder him. The lesson is learned, seared into his very soul. The purge that follows is unprecedented. Not just the 50 or so conspirators, but anyone even remotely suspected of sympathy. Anyone who had expressed Republican sentiments too loudly. Anyone who had opposed Caesar's reforms finds themselves arrested, exiled, or worse. The Senate is decimated. Its benches, once overflowing with Rome's most powerful families, now have gaping, ominous holes. This isn't just a political reshuffle. It's a systematic dismantling of the old guard, of the old Roman way of doing things. The quixotic idea of a restored republic, which many senators still clung to like a comforting security blanket, is ripped away. Rome is now, undeniably, a personal domain. A man who narrowly escaped death does not waste time on niceties. He consolidates, he eliminates, he crushes. The Republic, you realise, just died a slower, more agonising death than it did in your own history. The tremors of that brutal purge reverberated throughout Rome, shaking the very foundations of what remained of the Republic. You feel it in the air, a chilling silence where once vibrant political discourse, however fraught, had bloomed. The Forum, usually buzzing with the clamour of citizens and the stentorian voices of orators, now hums with a nervous, almost unnatural quiet. People walk with their heads down, their eyes darting, their whispers hushed. The message is clear, etched in the blood of the executed conspirators. Opposition is no longer merely unwise, it is suicidal. Caesar, the man who had famously declared, "I came, I saw, I conquered," had just proven he could also "I came, I purged, I ruled." While Caesar recuperates, his wounds are tended by the best physicians in Rome, perhaps even importing Greek specialists known for their surgical prowess. You can imagine the hushed intensity in his villa. Every flicker of a lamp, every soft footstep, scrutinised for treachery. The experience has hardened him, not just physically but psychologically. The man who had shown such remarkable clemency to Pompey's followers, the man who had even tried to reconcile with many of his former enemies, is gone. In his place is a ruler forged in the crucible of betrayal, utterly convinced of the necessity of absolute power, not just for himself, but for the future stability of Rome. He's no longer just a brilliant general or a shrewd politician. He's a visionary with a newly acquired taste for an iron fist, convinced that Rome's constant civil strife could only be quelled by an unchallengeable authority. It doesn't take long for the inevitable to begin. Within weeks of the assassination attempt, still recovering but radiating an aura of grim determination, Caesar makes his intentions brutally clear. There are no more coy dances around the title of Dictator Perpetuo, no more feigned modesty when offered a laurel wreath. Remember how, in our timeline, Mark Antony famously offered him the diadem at the Lupercalia festival, and Caesar dramatically refused it, carefully maintaining the Republican facade? Here, that moment replays with a chilling twist. Perhaps it's a staged public ceremony, or a decree read out to a terrified, compliant Senate, but the outcome is definitive. Caesar accepts the title of Rex. The word itself, king, had been anathema to Romans for over 4 centuries, ever since the expulsion of Tarquin the Proud. It invoked memories of tyranny, of foreign subjugation, of everything the Republic had been founded to oppose. But now, with the Senate decimated and the populace either too fearful or too weary of civil strife to resist, the historical taboo is shattered. Caesar doesn't just accept the crown, he takes it with a flourish, perhaps even commissioning a new, ornate diadem that harks back to the regal traditions of mythical Roman founders, or adopting a distinctive, almost ceremonial imperial purple toga, edged not just with the broad stripe of a senator, but with some ostentatious gold embroidery depicting celestial bodies, symbolising his divine right to rule. It's a subtle but stark visual declaration. This isn't the Republic anymore, folks. You're looking at your new monarchy. Good luck finding a gift for the king that isn't just another gold statue of himself. This is where the true dynastic ambition takes root. With the title of king comes the imperative of succession. Caesar, being the practical genius he was, isn't going to leave things to chance. He begins to meticulously lay the groundwork for an unchallenged hereditary rule. While Octavian, his adopted son, is still a young man, Caesar clearly sees him as less of an immediate political asset than a potential long-term heir. His focus now is on securing the present and potentially securing the future through a more immediate, politically mature successor, or at least setting up a system where Octavian's path to power is unimpeded by rivals. He might even start openly acknowledging Caesarion, his son with Cleopatra, not necessarily as the primary heir for Rome, given his Egyptian heritage, but certainly as a symbol of the bloodline he wishes to establish. This is a subtle but significant shift. In our history, Caesarion was a potential threat, and Octavian eventually had him executed. Here, Caesar's continued existence means Caesarion is a tool, a proof of genetic succession, a potential branch of the family tree rather than a rival. Imagine Caesar, now king of Rome, subtly introducing Caesarion at state functions. A little Egyptian Roman prince learning the ropes of imperial rule directly from the horses, or rather, the king's mouth. The republican pretense isn't just shattered, it's ground into dust and scattered to the four winds. The Comitia Centuriata, the popular assemblies, become mere formalities for ratifying Caesar's decrees. The Senate, already purged and terrified, is now reorganised into a subservient council, its members chosen by Caesar himself, not elected. Their role is no longer to debate or legislate, but to advise on trivial matters, and to applaud every pronouncement of the king. Think of it as a very exclusive, very well-fed fan club, where applause is mandatory, and dissent results in a one-way trip to, well, let's just say re-education in a very remote Roman province. This new reality is codified into law. Laws are passed, not by senatorial decree, but by royal edict. The entire administrative apparatus of the Roman state is slowly but surely reoriented to serve the monarch directly. Old republican magistracies are either abolished or rendered meaningless, their powers absorbed by Caesar's expanding imperial bureaucracy. The consuls, once the supreme executive officers of the Republic, become glorified court officials, appointed by Caesar for short, rotating terms, their names inscribed on official documents purely for historical continuity, like a decorative border around an ironclad decree. Scholars still debate whether the Roman populace would have ever truly accepted a king in the long term, even with Caesar's immense popularity. In our timeline, there was still strong republican sentiment, especially among the elite, which fueled the conspiracy. But here, the speed and brutality of Caesar's response, coupled with the profound weariness of constant civil war, might have led to a resigned acceptance. The promise of stability, of an end to the endless cycles of prescriptions and power struggles, might have outweighed the deep-seated aversion to monarchy. People just wanted to go to the market, enjoy their circuses, and not worry about who was going to prescribe their rich uncle next week. The very concept of Roman liberty, so cherished, at least in theory, by the Republic, is now irrevocably redefined. Liberty under the king means liberty from chaos, liberty from civil war, liberty to prosper under a benevolent, albeit absolute, ruler. It's a trade-off, and one that many Romans, tired of the incessant political turmoil, would likely have made. This transformation sets Rome on a fundamentally different path, one where the very idea of a shared public res, a thing of the people, is replaced by the personal domain of a single powerful ruler. The stage is set not just for a long reign, but for a whole new kind of Roman Empire. With Caesar firmly ensconced on his newly acquired throne, the immediate earth-shattering question of succession which had plagued our timeline after his assassination, simply vanishes. You remember the whirlwind, right? The frantic scramble for power, the clash of titans like Mark Antony and Octavian, the brutal civil wars that tore Rome apart for decades. Here, the air is thick with a different kind of tension. The heavy, almost suffocating stability of absolute rule. This shift profoundly impacts the young man who, in our reality, would become Rome's first emperor, Augustus. Here, under the watchful, ever-present eye of King Caesar, Octavian remains little more than an interesting footnote, a potential pawn, but never the destined ruler. At the time of the Ides of March, Octavian was a mere 18-year-old student, studying in Apollonia, modern-day Albania, and training with the legions, preparing to join Caesar on his grand Parthian campaign. In our timeline, Caesar's will, naming Octavian as his primary heir, was a bombshell that launched the young man into the treacherous currents of Roman politics. It gave him legitimacy, a rallying cry, avenger of Caesar, and the financial resources of the world's most powerful man. But here, Caesar is very much alive. The will is either unread, sealed away, or its contents become entirely irrelevant, superseded by a living, breathing, decree-issuing monarch. So, what becomes of Octavian? He's still Caesar's adopted son, yes, a significant honour in any Roman family, especially one so powerful. But he's not the saviour of Rome, nor the avenger of a murdered general. He's simply another ambitious young Roman, albeit one with an incredibly powerful stepfather. Caesar, having just survived an assassination attempt, is far too pragmatic and probably far too paranoid to simply hand over the reins of power to an untested youth. He wouldn't risk Rome's newfound stability on a political gamble. Plus, let's be honest, an 18-year-old trying to rule a world-spanning empire would be like entrusting the launch codes to a teenager who still struggles to organise his sock drawer. Chaos would inevitably ensue. Instead of being thrust into the limelight as a political heir, Octavian might find himself carefully cultivated, perhaps even subtly sidelined. Caesar, a master of patronage and control, would likely keep Octavian close, but under his direct supervision. He might be given important administrative tasks, overseeing the grain supply in Egypt, or managing public works projects in Italy. Imagine him, a studious young man, meticulously poring over ledgers, ensuring the concrete for Caesar's new aqueducts is up to snuff. Son, you can almost hear Caesar saying, with that gentle sarcasm, the empire runs on organised paperwork, not just glorious battles. Now, where did you put the receipt for those new marble statues? His military training, so crucial to his rise in our timeline, would likely continue, but perhaps without the urgent need for him to prove himself as a field commander. He might serve in a junior capacity during Caesar's later campaigns, perhaps as a military tribune, learning the ropes from seasoned generals, but always in Caesar's shadow. He wouldn't be leading legions. He'd be observing, taking notes, maybe even designing new-fangled catapults in his spare time. He was known to have a knack for organisation and detail, which would be highly valued in an empire run by a meticulous dictator. Historians still debate the extent of Octavian's true military genius versus his political acumen. In this timeline, his political rise is stunted, so his potential as a general would be less tested. He might develop into a competent officer, but he wouldn't be the unparalleled military leader he became in our world, largely because he wouldn't have to be. Caesar himself is still leading the legions. and he's not sharing that glory with a young upstart. Perhaps Octavian cultivates a different kind of influence. He was after all a highly intelligent and learned individual. With Caesar alive, Octavian might delve deeper into philosophy, rhetoric, or even become a patron of the arts and sciences. He could become Caesar's chief advisor on legal reforms, or a leading figure in the burgeoning imperial court, known for his administrative brilliance rather than his martial prowess. Picture him, not clad in armour, but in a toga tailored from the finest cloth, surrounded by scrolls, debating the finer points of Roman law with the empire's leading jurists, always ensuring that every new statute reinforced Caesar's absolute authority. This path would allow him influence, status and wealth, but never the ultimate power. One quirky tidbit. Octavian, in our history, was famously fastidious about his appearance and health, even developing an unusual habit of always wearing 4 tunics to avoid getting sick. In this alternate timeline, perhaps this obsession for order and routine extends to his administrative duties. You might see him meticulously organising Caesar's imperial archives, colour-coding scrolls by province, or developing an early version of a hierarchical filing system that would make any modern accountant weep with joy. The Roman imperial bureaucracy would be the most efficient in history, thanks to young Octavian's almost obsessive attention to detail, down to the exact quantity of ink used per scroll. His ambition, which was undeniable in our timeline, wouldn't simply vanish, but it would be redirected, reshaped by the overwhelming presence of Caesar. Instead of aiming for the Principate, Octavian would aim for a trusted position within the Caesarian monarchy. He might become a loyal, invaluable aide, a kind of chief of staff to the king, rather than a rival or a successor. He would live a life of comfort, influence, and perhaps even quiet personal fulfillment, but without the immense burden and peril of ruling the known world. His name would be remembered, if at all, as a highly competent administrator in the early years of the Caesarian dynasty, a detail in history textbooks, rather than the focus of entire volumes. The grand narrative of Roman history, which in our world is so defined by the transition from republic to empire through Augustus, would be entirely rewritten. There would be no second triumvirate, no Battle of Actium, no Antony and Cleopatra tragedy. Those epic clashes simply don't happen because the primary antagonist to Octavian's rise, a living, breathing Julius Caesar, never leaves the stage. The butterfly effect here is massive. Entire swathes of Roman history are simply erased, replaced by a continuous, albeit less dramatic, narrative of monarchical consolidation. The very identity of the Roman Empire, as we know it, would be fundamentally altered. All because one fateful dagger missed its mark. With the internal threats purged and the Republic's ghost finally laid to rest, Caesar, now King of Rome, turns his gaze eastward. You can almost feel the collective sigh of relief, or perhaps terror, across the empire as the immediate domestic bloodshed subsides. But Caesar isn't one to rest on his laurels, especially with those lingering wounds, a constant physical reminder of betrayal. He needs a grand gesture, a definitive triumph to cement his new reign and to wash away the memory of Roman humiliation. And there, shining like a dangerous mirage on the horizon, is Parthia. In our timeline, Julius Caesar was, indeed, planning a massive military expedition against the Parthian Empire. This wasn't just some fringe idea, it was a major strategic objective. a way to avenge the catastrophic defeat of Crassus at Carrhae in 53 BC, where Rome lost its treasured legionary standards. For a Roman general, especially one who had fought and bled for Rome's glory, reclaiming those eagles and punishing the Parthians was a deeply personal and supremely patriotic duty. It was the ultimate mic drop, the sort of grand military campaign that would make Alexander the Great look like he was just on a really long walk. But here, it's not just about military glory, it's about establishing the undisputed authority of the new monarchy. The successful Parthian campaign isn't just a military victory, it's a statement. It tells the world, and more importantly, the terrified Roman elite, that Caesar is not merely a strong man, but a divinely favoured king, destined to expand Rome's dominion to the very edges of the known world. He would have rallied immense resources, perhaps even greater than originally planned, throwing the full weight of his consolidated empire behind this venture. You can imagine the sheer logistical nightmare. Legions stretching for miles across Anatolia, supply trains longer than a Roman road, all orchestrated by the man who literally wrote the book on military organisation. "Listen, men," he might have quipped to his quartermasters. "If you thought supplying Gaul was tough, just wait until you try to find a decent wine merchant in Mesopotamia." Caesar, now in his late 50s, but still possessing that incandescent strategic brilliance, would lead the campaign himself. He wouldn't delegate this. This is his vengeance, his triumph. The legions, fresh from their deployment in Greece and loyal to the core, would be augmented by new levies drawn from a Rome now under absolute control. The Parthians, famous for their cataphracts, heavily armoured cavalry, and horse archers, were a formidable foe, as Crassus learned to his eternal regret. But Crassus was no Caesar. Caesar would learn from past mistakes. He'd likely employ superior intelligence, perhaps even using a network of spies and informants that would make the CIA look like an amateur book club. He'd adapt Roman tactics, maybe investing heavily in specialised anti-cavalry units, or developing new, more effective field fortifications to negate the Parthian hit-and-run strategy. Perhaps he even imports some of those legendary Scythian archers from the steppes to counter the Parthians' own famed bowmen. The conflict would be fierce, undoubtedly, but under Caesar's direct command, the outcome is different. You hear whispers of a decisive engagement, not another crushing defeat like Carrhae, but a hard-won victory where Roman discipline and engineering prowess finally break the Parthian formations. The lost standards of Crassus are not only recovered, but paraded through the streets of Rome, a symbol of Rome's restored honour and Caesar's unparalleled martial might. The Parthian capital of Ctesiphon might even fall, perhaps not permanently occupied, but certainly sacked and humiliated. This isn't just about winning a battle, it's about reshaping the balance of power in the East. This grand triumph solidifies Caesar's military legend beyond anything achieved in our timeline. He's no longer just the conqueror of Gaul, the vanquisher of Pompey. He is the man who stretched Rome's arms into the very cradle of civilization, humbling an empire that had defied Rome for decades. His image, already ubiquitous on coins and statues, now takes on an even more epic, almost mythical quality. He might even adopt a new honorary title, something akin to Parthicus Maximus, further cementing his legacy. He's the undisputed, unchallengeable military genius of his age, and arguably of all ages. Try finding someone in Rome who doesn't think he's basically a god now. It'd be harder than finding a quiet spot in the Colosseum on Gladiator Day. This success naturally leads to significant eastern expansion. While a full annexation of the Parthian Empire might be too ambitious, Rome establishes clear client states, strengthens its grip on Armenia, and secures strategic trade routes that run through Mesopotamia. New Roman provinces might be established, carved out of Parthian territory, ensuring a steady flow of tribute and resources back to Rome. The Euphrates becomes not just a river, but a new, highly militarized Roman border, guarded by permanent legions. This eastern triumph leads to a fundamental reorientation of Rome's strategic focus. For centuries, Rome had looked west, to Gaul, to Spain, to Britannia, driven by resources, ambition, and the need to secure its northern borders. But now, with the East humbled and its vast wealth tantalizingly close, the empire's centre of gravity begins to shift. There's an immense influx of gold, silver, spices, and exotic goods from the east. Imagine the Roman markets, already bustling, now overflowing with Persian silks, Indian gems, and Arabian perfumes. The Roman economy booms, fueled by this new influx of wealth and trade. This reorientation isn't just economic or military, it's cultural. Greek influence, already strong in Rome, would be further augmented by Persian and Babylonian elements. Roman art, architecture, and even religious practices might absorb Eastern influences, leading to a more cosmopolitan and syncretic culture. You might see Roman temples incorporating elements of Parthian design, or even a subtle shift in Roman religious thought towards more mystical Eastern cults that would later flourish in our timeline. Some scholars still debate the precise long-term impact of such an Eastern focus, even in our own timeline, questioning whether it would have led to an eventual overstretch or a more resilient, diverse empire. But here, under Caesar's firm hand, it feels like an unstoppable, powerful new direction. The political implications are also profound. The East now offers new avenues for ambitious Roman administrators and generals. Instead of provincial governorships in Gaul or Spain, the most coveted posts would be in the newly secured Eastern territories, offering immense opportunities for wealth and power, always under Caesar's watchful eye, of course. This shift also means that regions like Germania, which in our timeline proved to be a continuous headache and drain on Roman resources, might receive less attention. Why bother with damp forests and stubborn barbarians when there's rich, exotic land to be exploited in the sunny east? The resources poured into Parthia might mean less focus on a full conquest of Germany, perhaps leaving those tribes to simmer for a little longer before Rome decided to deal with them. Or perhaps Caesar decides he's built enough walls and just wants to chill on his new golden throne, admiring all the new shiny things from Persia. With Parthia humbled and the vast wealth of the East now flowing into Rome's coffers, King Caesar turns his prodigious intellect to the home front. You might think, after surviving an assassination attempt and conquering half the known world, he'd just kick back with a goblet of Falernian wine and enjoy the good life. But that's not Caesar. He's a planner, a builder, a visionary, and now, with absolute authority solidified by both fear and unparalleled military success, he embarks on a radical societal reconfiguration. This isn't just tweaking the gears of the Roman state, it's a fundamental overhaul, like rebuilding a classic car from the ground up. but replacing the engine with a jet turbine and adding a few cup holders for good measure. The first, and perhaps most impactful, of his reforms is the sweeping land redistribution. For centuries, Rome had grappled with the problem of land inequality. The rich grew richer, amassing vast latifundia, huge agricultural estates, worked by slaves, while landless veterans and impoverished plebeians swelled the ranks of the urban poor, a constant source of unrest. In our timeline, the Gracchi brothers had died trying to address this, and Caesar himself had implemented some land laws, but always with senatorial opposition and political compromise. Now, no more compromise. Caesar, now king, simply decrees it. Vast tracts of public land, previously held by wealthy senators and equestrians, are seized. Additionally, lands acquired from conquered territories, especially from the new eastern provinces, and even parts of Gaul not fully settled, are systematically surveyed and divided. These parcels are then distributed not just to his loyal veterans, but to the urban poor, to newly enfranchised citizens, and to families willing to settle new colonies. You can practically hear the collective groan of the old Roman aristocracy as their ancestral acres are carved up, though no better than to protest too loudly. It's like a massive government stimulus package, but instead of direct cash, you get a farm and a stern look from a Roman centurion reminding you to actually work it. This isn't charity, it's pragmatic nation building. By giving land to a significant portion of the populace, Caesar creates a new class of free, land-owning Roman citizens who are deeply loyal to him and his dynasty. They are now invested in the stability of the new regime, their prosperity directly linked to Caesar's continued rule. This also helps to depopulate the overcrowded city of Rome, easing social tensions and reducing the potential for bread riots. The old joke about Romans loving bread and circuses still holds, but now they're getting their own bread, fresh from their own fields, and maybe even a local circus too. Next, and even more revolutionary, is the reorganisation of Roman citizenship. In our timeline, Roman citizenship was a highly coveted, slowly expanding privilege. Here, Caesar accelerates its expansion dramatically. Having fought alongside Gauls, Iberians, and now Eastern peoples, he understands the value of integrating loyal subjects directly into the Roman system. Not just veterans, but entire communities that showed unwavering loyalty are granted citizenship en masse. This isn't just honorary citizenship either. It comes with full voting rights, though those rights are increasingly meaningless under a monarchy, legal protections, and the opportunity to participate in Roman society at all levels. This influx of new citizens fundamentally alters the demographics of Rome. The traditional Roman identity, once fiercely exclusive, becomes more expansive, more inclusive. You see people from Gaul, with their distinctive Celtic features, walking proudly in togas in the Forum, or perhaps a Syrian merchant from Antioch, now a full Roman citizen, establishing a thriving business in Ostia. This move also dilutes the power of the old Roman families, who can no longer claim a monopoly on Romanness. It's a calculated move to broaden his base of support and create a more unified, less fractious empire. Some scholars debate the precise long-term impact of such rapid citizen expansion, even in our own timeline, questioning whether it truly fostered cohesion or merely spread the seeds of cultural dilution too thinly. But here Caesar, with his keen political mind, saw it as a necessary step for longevity. This leads directly to a fundamental alteration of the social hierarchy. The old patrician families, those ancient Roman bloodlines that had dominated politics for centuries, find their influence severely curtailed. Their lands are seized, their political power is stripped, and their traditional roles in the Senate are filled by Caesar's appointees, often loyal generals, successful administrators, or even wealthy equestrians and prominent citizens from the newly enfranchised provinces. New elites rise, their power and wealth directly tied to Caesar's patronage, not inherited privilege. It's a meritocracy, to a degree, but one entirely dictated by the king's will. You might even see the establishment of a new kind of imperial nobility, separate from the old patrician and even equestrian orders. Perhaps Caesar establishes a new class of king's men, individuals personally appointed to high office, given special privileges, and even granted new, non-hereditary titles that elevate them above the traditional social strata. Think of it as a super VIP club, where the only membership requirement is absolute loyalty to the man at the top. This creates a powerful new incentive structure, where aspiring Romans look not to the old republican institutions for advancement, but directly to the king. This system is designed to integrate conquered peoples more fully, a hallmark of Caesar's pragmatic approach. He had already started this in Gaul, granting citizenship to some Gallic communities and incorporating Gallic auxiliaries into his legions. Now, with a unified empire and an eastern triumph, this policy is expanded. Provinces are not just exploited, they are Romanized. Education in Latin and Roman law is promoted, roads are built, and Roman administration is established in even the remotest corners. While the process is still undoubtedly top-down and often enforced, the promise of full Roman citizenship and participation in the new imperial order offers a powerful incentive for compliance. A quirky detail might be how this impacts local customs. Perhaps Caesar, in his bid for true integration, even sponsors a grand census of the entire empire, a bureaucratic masterpiece that would make any modern statistician swoon. This would allow him to understand the unique cultural nuances of each region, perhaps even leading to him allowing some regional traditions to persist, as long as they don't threaten Roman authority. You might even see a new imperial standard for toga design, incorporating subtle regional patterns, so a Gaul can still feel a touch of home, even while wearing the symbol of Roman power. Or maybe he just gets a little too obsessed with ensuring everyone uses the same weights and measures, leading to endless arguments about the exact volume of a Roman amphora. This radical restructuring isn't just about efficiency or loyalty, it's about control. By dismantling the old power structures and creating new ones beholden solely to him, Caesar ensures that no rival faction, no disgruntled senator, no ambitious general, can ever again challenge his authority. He's building an empire where loyalty isn't just a virtue, it's the only path to survival and prosperity. This deep-seated transformation lays the foundation for a truly centralized monarchical state, far beyond the initial cautious steps taken by our timeline's Augustus. The Roman world, under King Caesar, is rapidly transforming into something entirely new, shedding its republican skin like a snake in the summer sun, revealing a glistening autocratic form beneath. With Rome's domestic landscape thoroughly reshaped, the Senate now a quiet, compliant echo chamber, and the East firmly under his heel, King Caesar turns his legendary foresight to the most crucial long-term issue facing any new monarchy: succession. You might imagine that a man who just conquered the world and survived a dozen daggers would be content. But Caesar, ever the pragmatist, knows that the greatest threat to a nascent dynasty isn't foreign invasion or internal rebellion. It's the chaotic, often bloody transition of power. He's seen Rome tear itself apart too many times, and he's not about to let his life's work unravel into another messy civil war just because he forgot to name a successor in a notarized document. He's not leaving this to chance, or to a frantic scramble like a group of toga-clad vultures fighting over a particularly juicy leftover from a banquet. Caesar, now in unchallenged command, starts to meticulously plan for a direct, unbroken line of succession. This is where his adoption of Octavian, a crucial historical fact from our timeline, takes on a subtly different, yet equally profound meaning. In our world, Octavian's adoption was revealed post-mortem, making him Caesar's avenger and rightful heir. Here, it's a living, breathing, public pronouncement. Caesar doesn't just refer to Octavian as his adopted son, he begins to openly groom him as the heir presumptive. This isn't just about inheritance, it's about formalising a political lineage. Octavian, as we discussed, is already operating within Caesar's inner circle, learning the ropes, perhaps still focused on administration. But now his education intensifies. He's not just observing, he's actively participating in council meetings, travelling with Caesar on inspections of new infrastructure projects, and even sitting in on military strategy sessions, learning the nuances of governance directly from the master. Imagine Caesar, now king, giving young Octavian a stern lecture on the importance of accurate tax records, or perhaps a masterclass in reading facial expressions during senatorial debates, advising him on how to spot the nervous cough of a tax dodger. "Remember, my boy," Caesar might say with a wry grin, "the true power isn't in the sword. It's in knowing exactly how many amphorae of olive oil each province owes." Crucially, Caesarion, Caesar's biological son with Cleopatra, also plays a very different role here. In our timeline, he was a massive threat to Octavian and swiftly eliminated. But with Caesar alive and planning a dynasty, Caesarion represents the bloodline. He might not be the primary heir for Rome, given his Egyptian connections and the continued Roman aversion to overt foreign influence at the very heart of the empire. However, Caesar could designate him as a ruler for the prosperous eastern territories, perhaps establishing a separate Caesarian branch of the dynasty that governs from Alexandria or even Antioch. This would solidify Rome's control over the East through a direct familial link, rather than through mere conquest and provincial governors. It would be a sophisticated power-sharing model, ensuring both succession and geographical control without overstretching Rome's administrative reach from the centre. To further legitimise this new monarchical order, Caesar might commission new rituals and ceremonies. Perhaps a grand public declaration of his chosen heir, overseen by the Pontifex Maximus, a role Caesar himself held, invoking divine blessing. You might even see the creation of new regalia, not just a crown, but a distinctive sceptre or an imperial seal that carries the image of Caesar and his designated successor, side by side, visually cementing the continuity of power. Think of it as a historical branding exercise, but with more purple and fewer catchy jingles. This meticulous planning extends to strategic marriages. Caesar, ever the political chess player, would arrange marriages for his close female relatives and for Octavian himself, not just for personal alliances, but to integrate key Roman families into the new imperial structure. A marriage for Octavian to a daughter from a powerful old Roman family that has survived the purge might be crucial for bridging the gap between the old aristocracy and the new monarchy, providing a veneer of continuity even as the underlying power structure shifts fundamentally. This emphasis on a direct, unchallenged succession transforms Rome from a principate, the subtle first citizen model that our timeline's Augustus eventually perfected, into a truly explicit, hereditary monarchy. There's no more pretense of republican institutions simply having a first among equals at their head. Caesar is king, and his successor will be king. This removes any ambiguity, any cracks that rival factions might exploit. The impact on Rome is profound. This clarity of succession designed by Caesar himself would prevent the tumultuous civil wars that followed his death in our timeline. No triumvirates, no battles of Philippi or Actium. The military, which had so often been the decisive factor in Roman power struggles, would now be unequivocally loyal to the monarch and his chosen heir, removing the incentive for generals to vie for ultimate power. After all, if the line of succession is clear, who would risk defying the all-powerful king and his designated successor for a dubious claim to power? Only a fool, and fools tended not to last long in Caesar's Rome. Scholars still debate whether the Roman populace, given its long history of republicanism, would have truly accepted a full-blown hereditary monarchy in the long term, even with the promise of peace. Some argue that the deep-seated aversion to kingship would eventually resurface. But here, the argument is perhaps rendered moot by the sheer length and stability of Caesar's reign, which would indoctrinate generations into accepting the new normal. If peace and prosperity are maintained for decades under a clearly defined monarchical system, the aversion to the title king might simply fade, replaced by a grateful acceptance of order. It's hard to complain about a king when he's busy building new aqueducts and ensuring your gran gets her pension on time. The process involves codifying new laws that govern the imperial succession, perhaps a kind of lex Julia de regno, a royal law that explicitly defines the powers of the monarch and the rules for identifying the heir. This would prevent challenges based on ambiguous wills or traditional Roman adoption practices. The law would establish the imperium, supreme power, as residing permanently with the king rather than being granted temporarily by the Senate or people. This sets a precedent for absolute authority that lasts for centuries, shaping the very legal and governmental DNA of the empire. A quirky detail? Perhaps Caesar, being a man obsessed with history and his own legacy, even commissions a new official genealogy tracing his lineage not just to Venus, but through mythical Roman kings, thereby blending his divine ancestry with the ancient royal past of Rome. He might even appoint an imperial genealogist, whose sole job is to craft elaborate family trees connecting the Caesarian house to every hero and deity imaginable. And woe betide the poor soul who finds a distant relative who was, say, a tax collector with sticky fingers. That line would be immediately redacted, of course. The stage is indeed set for a truly monarchical Rome. This isn't the carefully constructed Principate of Augustus, which maintained a facade of republicanism for generations. This is a bold, undeniable declaration of kingship, directly modelled on Eastern monarchies but with a Roman twist. The implications are staggering. Rome's trajectory is fixed, its governmental structure solidified, and its future path as an unquestioned hereditary empire is secured. All because a man who stared death in the face decided he wasn't going to let anyone else mess up his legacy. He's building not just an empire, but a family business. And he's ensuring it has a very long-term business plan. With his succession plan firmly underway, and the riches of the East lining Rome's newly royal coffers, King Caesar isn't content to simply admire his sprawling empire from the comfortable confines of his newly remodelled palace on the Palatine Hill. Oh no, the man who had carved out a vast personal domain in Gaul, who had twice crossed the Rhine, and who had even briefly set foot on the mysterious shores of Britannia, still had an itch for conquest. He sees the western frontiers not as barriers, but as invitations. He's already established himself as a master of the East. Now it's time to show those wild western barbarians who's boss. You can almost hear the triumphant trumpets blowing, and then the quiet, weary sigh of Roman legionaries packing their bags for another long march into the damp, cold unknown. Seriously, sir, you imagine a grizzled centurion muttering, "More mud? I thought we were done with mud after Gaul." First up, Germania. In our timeline, the formidable Teutoburg forest disaster under Augustus effectively halted Roman expansion beyond the Rhine, leading to a long-standing frontier there. But here, with Caesar at the helm, the ambition is different. He's not simply looking for a defensive line, he's looking for control. He sees the vast, ancient forests of Germania not as impassable wilderness, but as potential sources of timber, of furs, of new lands for Roman settlers, and, crucially, a continuous supply of fierce warriors to fill his legions. He knows these Germanic tribes are formidable, but he also knows their disunity is their weakness. He'd use the same divide and conquer tactics he perfected in Gaul, playing one chieftain against another, offering Roman gold and prestige to those who would betray their kin. It's like a Roman-style reality TV show, Survivor, Germania edition, where the prize isn't 1,000,000 sesterces, but not being utterly crushed by a legion. Caesar launches a far more sustained and deliberate campaign into Germania than our timeline ever saw. This isn't a quick, punitive raid. It's a full-scale invasion with the explicit goal of permanent occupation and provincialization. He'd order the construction of massive Roman forts deep within Germanic territory, interconnected by meticulously engineered Roman roads that would stretch like veins through the heart of the forest, allowing rapid troop movement and supply. Imagine a legionary camp sprouting up seemingly overnight in the middle of a primeval forest, complete with bathhouses and small, surprisingly efficient amphitheatres, because even Roman soldiers needed entertainment, right? They'd bring their own bread, but they'd probably complain bitterly about the lack of decent wine or fresh olives in the Germanic wilds. His strategy would involve systematic deforestation in key areas to deny cover to ambushers, perhaps even developing specialised forest clearing legions. He might also make extensive use of riverine fleets on the Elbe and Weser rivers, using them as arteries to transport troops and supplies, bypassing the difficult terrain. This sustained pressure, combined with superior Roman organisation and Caesar's unwavering focus, would gradually wear down the Germanic tribes. The goal isn't just military victory, but long-term pacification and integration. You'd see the establishment of Roman towns, the introduction of Latin as a lingua franca, and a slow but inexorable Romanization of the more accessible parts of Germania. This would mean a direct Roman presence reaching much further east than the Rhine, perhaps even establishing a permanent frontier along the Elbe or beyond. Then there's Britannia. Caesar had already conducted 2 scouting expeditions to the island in our timeline, but they were never full conquests. He saw its strategic value, its potential wealth in tin and lead, and its utility as a base to prevent Gallic resistance from finding allies. Now, with unlimited resources and the political will of an absolute monarch, he would complete the job. This wouldn't be a brief landing. It would be a colossal invasion force, far larger and more sustained than the one Claudius eventually sent in 43 AD in our history. You imagine legions, a vast fleet of supply ships, and engineers ready to build permanent infrastructure from day one. Caesar, possibly even leading the initial landing himself, would systematically conquer the major tribes, securing key resource areas like the tin mines of Cornwall and the agricultural lands of the southeast. He'd established Roman cities like Londinium and Camulodunum earlier, and with greater imperial backing, accelerating the Romanization of the island. The Britons, fierce though they were, would ultimately be no match for the full might of a Roman Empire under a truly unified, centralized command. You might even see quirky attempts at Romanizing British Druids, perhaps offering them a new, more prestigious role as official imperial soothsayers, complete with matching togas and much better dental care. This greater western expansion has profound implications. First, it means a truly enormous Roman Empire, stretching from the deserts of Mesopotamia to the forests of Germania and the mist-shrouded shores of Britannia. This vastness would present new administrative challenges, but also unparalleled economic opportunities. New resources would flow into Rome: Germanic timber, British metals, even amber from the Baltic region through new trade routes. The sheer scale of it all would solidify Rome's position as the undisputed superpower of the ancient world. You could almost hear Caesar, perhaps during a rare moment of relaxation, muttering, "It's a big world out there, but we're making good progress." The cultural landscape of these regions would be irrevocably altered. A deeper, earlier Romanization of Germania could mean a very different future for Central Europe. Instead of developing largely independently, Germanic cultures might be more thoroughly infused with Roman law, Latin language, and Roman customs. This could potentially lead to a less fragmented Europe in the centuries to come, or at least one with a stronger, more pervasive Roman heritage, much like Gaul. Scholars still debate whether such vast expansion would have been truly sustainable in the long term, or if it would have led to an eventual overextension that drained Rome's resources and left it vulnerable on too many frontiers. But under Caesar's direct, hands-on command, and with the immense stability of his unified empire, the argument for sustainability gains considerable weight. He wouldn't be sending distant legions. He'd be micromanaging it all from his war tent, possibly even inventing a rudimentary form of battlefield email to ensure his generals were doing exactly what he wanted. One quirky tidbit: perhaps Caesar, ever keen on public works and infrastructure, orders the construction of a massive permanent bridge across the Rhine, not just temporary pontoons. This bridge, an engineering marvel, would serve as a symbol of Roman dominance over Germania, a constant reminder to the tribes that the Romans were there to stay. It might even become a new tourist attraction for wealthy Roman citizens, looking for a bit of frontier excitement and a chance to take a selfie with a real barbarian, from a safe distance, of course. Or perhaps he commissions a massive imperial library dedicated solely to cataloguing every single plant and animal found in Germania and Britannia. Because why conquer a place if you don't fully understand its flora and fauna? This expansion is about more than just land. It's about extending the reach of Roman law, Roman administration, and the Pax Romana. By bringing these new, often restive territories firmly into the imperial fold, Caesar creates a deeper sense of security for the older, established provinces. The raiding Germanic tribes are now Roman subjects, or at least Roman clients, and the Britons are paying taxes. The Roman Empire, under the unwavering hand of its king, is solidifying its boundaries and expanding its influence, establishing a level of global dominance that our timeline's more cautious emperors could only dream of. This sprawling, powerful entity is Caesar's enduring legacy, a monument to his ambition and his genius, etched onto the very map of the ancient world. With the map of the known world steadily turning various shades of Roman red, you might imagine a period of relaxation for King Caesar. But internal consolidation, for a ruler like him, is just as crucial as external conquest. The grand new empire, stretching from Britannia to Mesopotamia, demands a unified, unquestioning core. And at the heart of that core, a lingering thorn, however diminished, remained: the Roman Senate. This ancient body, once the very embodiment of republican power, the ultimate arbiter of Rome's destiny, had seen its influence wane dramatically under Caesar's original dictatorship. But now, after the near-fatal Ides of March, any pretense of shared governance or independent action is brutally, definitively crushed. It's like watching a majestic, centuries-old oak tree slowly, meticulously, have every one of its branches trimmed, then its trunk hollowed out until it's just a hollow shell, still standing, but utterly lifeless. In our timeline, after Caesar's death, the Senate still played a significant, albeit often manipulated role in the ensuing power struggles. Octavian, as Augustus, was careful to maintain a facade of senatorial power, even granting them some administrative functions and allowing them to retain a degree of prestige. He understood the deep-seated Roman reverence for their republican past and sought to co-opt it, not destroy it outright. But King Caesar, having looked death in the face at the hands of those very senators, has no such patience, no such desire for subtlety. His near assassination instilled in him a chilling pragmatism. If a body cannot be trusted, it must be rendered powerless. The initial purge, swift and bloody, had decimated the ranks of the Senate, so many prominent families were either eliminated or exiled. But Caesar doesn't stop there. He systematically fills the vacant seats and expands the Senate's numbers even further, but with a new breed of senator. These aren't the proud old Roman aristocrats, steeped in generations of political intrigue and republican ideals. No, these are his loyal generals, his trusted administrators, wealthy equestrians who had shrewdly supported him, and, crucially, prominent men from the newly Romanized provinces. You see a Gallic chieftain, still perhaps a little uncomfortable in his toga, sitting next to a seasoned Roman legate, both owing their position entirely to the king. The Senate, once a bastion of Roman tradition, now looks more like a global fan club, with members chosen for their absolute devotion rather than their lineage or independent spirit. The legislative functions of the Senate, once its primary purpose, become mere formalities. No longer do they debate the merits of a new tax or the wisdom of a military campaign. Those decisions are made by Caesar in his private council, or simply issued as royal edicts. The Senate's role is reduced to ratifying his decrees, nodding vigorously, and perhaps competing to offer the most fawning compliments to the king's wisdom and foresight. Imagine a senator standing up, cleared to speak, and instead of a powerful oratorical flourish, he simply says, "All hail Caesar!" What he said, and sits down, looking immensely relieved. It's a job description that primarily involves attendance and applause, probably with excellent catering as a fringe benefit. The loss of its independent spirit is the most profound change. The Senate had, for centuries, been a forum for vigorous, often vicious debate. Even when compromised by powerful individuals, it maintained a theoretical capacity for opposition, a voice, however faint, of the Roman people. Here, that voice is utterly silenced. Any dissenting opinions are not tolerated. Whispers of opposition are met with swift, brutal consequences. Senators who had once proudly traced their lineage back to the founders of the Republic now meekly accept their gilded cages, knowing that any perceived challenge to Caesar's authority could lead to their immediate downfall, or worse, the ruin of their entire family. The phrase free speech probably got you a one-way ticket to a forced labour camp in a distant province, working on a very large, very pointless ditch. To ensure this compliance, Caesar might introduce a formal loyalty oath for all senators and high officials, not just to the state, but specifically to him and his dynasty. This oath would be renewed annually, perhaps with a grand public ceremony, ensuring constant reinforcement of their subservience. Failure to attend, or even a subtle grimace during the oath, could lead to suspicion. This creates a culture of surveillance and self-censorship, where personal ambition is channeled only through absolute loyalty to the king. One quirky tidbit: Caesar, being a man of efficiency and perhaps a little too fond of his own image, might even streamline senatorial procedures to an almost absurd degree. Perhaps he introduces new, strict rules about how long a senator can speak, no more endless rambling, or mandates that all proposed legislation must be submitted on pre-approved templates with a specific font, just to ensure consistency. You could imagine him creating a special, oversized gong for the presiding official to hit if a senator dares to deviate from the pre-approved talking points. Next topic, please. The King's decree on bathhouse regulations. The long-term consequence of this profound change is a period of unprecedented, centralized authority. The Senate, once a check, however imperfect, on executive power, is now a tool. This establishes a clear precedent for all future Roman rulers, solidifying the idea that Rome is a monarchy, not a republic. Future kings will look back to King Caesar's reign as the blueprint for absolute control, making any future attempts to revive republican ideals almost unthinkable. This isn't just about Caesar's reign, it's about shaping the very DNA of Roman governance for centuries to come. Scholars still debate whether the Republic, even in our own timeline, was truly capable of reforming itself and surviving, or if its demise was an inevitable consequence of its expansion and internal contradictions. Here, that debate is decisively settled. The Republic was indeed doomed, and Caesar, by surviving, simply ensured its quick, agonizing death rather than its slower, more drawn-out collapse. The very concept of civic participation and public debate is eroded, replaced by a system where all power flows downwards from a single source. This shift also means that the Roman legal system, traditionally based on a complex interplay of senatorial decrees, popular assemblies, and praetorian edicts, simplifies dramatically. Laws are now primarily royal edicts, with the Senate merely approving them. This makes the legal system more efficient, perhaps, but also less responsive to the diverse needs of a vast empire, as the king's will becomes paramount. There's no longer the messy give and take of different factions. There's just the steady, unwavering hand of the monarch. The extinguishing of the Senate's independent spirit also means a profound change in Roman political culture. Gone are the rivalries, the speeches, the complex patronage networks that defined Republican politics. In their place is a quieter, more hierarchical system where advancement comes through direct service and flattery of the king. The old Roman virtues of public service and civic responsibility are replaced by loyalty and efficiency. Rome, under King Caesar, truly becomes an empire in every sense of the word, not just in its territorial reach, but in its absolute, centralised and hereditary governance. The stage is perfectly set for the glorious, albeit iron-fisted era of the Pax Caesariana. With the Roman Senate reduced to a ceremonial echo, the vast western lands under Roman dominion, and the east firmly humbled King Caesar, now nearing his 60s but still possessing that tireless energy, ushers in an era of unprecedented calm. You can almost feel the collective sigh of relief ripple across the empire, a deep, contented breath after generations of civil war and political turmoil. This isn't just a lull. This is the Pax Caesariana, a long period of enforced peace and stability, secured not by negotiation or fragile alliances, but by the iron will and omnipresent power of a single, unchallenged ruler. It's like the universe collectively decided, "Okay, Caesar, you win. Just please stop fighting now." This peace isn't born of pacifism. It's the peace of a truly dominant, centralised authority, with no major internal rivals left to challenge him, and all external threats either neutralised or deterred by his formidable legions. Caesar can finally focus Rome's immense resources inwards. The civil wars that plagued our timeline, the constant jostling for power, the proscriptions and assassinations, they simply don't happen. Think of all that energy, all that manpower, all that gold that was once spent on Roman fighting Roman, now redirected towards building, expanding and stabilising. It's like suddenly finding a massive forgotten treasure chest in your attic and deciding to use it for sensible home improvements instead of buying a fleet of gladiators. The daily lives of ordinary Roman citizens, and indeed ordinary subjects across the empire, undergo a profound transformation. Merchants can travel without fear of banditry or sudden skirmishes. Farmers can plant their crops with confidence, knowing their harvests won't be trampled by warring legions. Trade routes, both overland and maritime, flourish like never before. You see bustling markets full of goods from every corner of the empire. British tin next to Egyptian papyrus, Gallic wine beside Parthian spices, all flowing freely under the watchful eye of Caesar's imperial administration. The sense of security of an ordered world becomes the new normal, a tangible benefit of absolute rule that many Romans would happily trade for abstract notions of republican liberty. This era of peace fuels a monumental surge in infrastructure projects. Caesar, a master builder and engineer, would have initiated programs on a scale unseen before. Think roads, not just military roads, but a vast network connecting every significant city and town, ensuring rapid communication and efficient movement of goods and people. Imagine yourself travelling across Gaul on a perfectly paved Roman road. So straight and well maintained, you could practically roll a legionary standard all the way from Massilia to Lugdunum. There would be new aqueducts, bringing fresh water to burgeoning cities, rivaling the marvels of the Aqua Claudia or the Pont de Garde. New bridges, harbours, public granaries, and massive civic buildings would spring up, all stamped with the imperial eagle and often bearing Caesar's image, a constant reminder of who brought this prosperity. One established historical fact is that Caesar had indeed initiated significant public works in Rome, like the Forum of Caesar, but his assassination cut short his plans for even grander urban renewal. Here, those plans come to fruition, and then some. Rome itself would become even more magnificent, a shining capital for a truly global empire. You might see massive new public baths, even grander than the baths of Caracalla, designed not just for hygiene, but as centres for social gathering, exercise and leisure, where even a common plebeian could enjoy a warm soak after a long day of, well, being a common plebeian. This push for infrastructure extends far beyond Italy. In the newly pacified Germania, roads would carve paths through ancient forests. In Britannia, new towns and villas would rise from the misty landscape. The Roman Empire, under King Caesar, would literally be paved with his ambition, making communication and administration across vast distances remarkably efficient. This integration wasn't just about roads, it was about standardizing weights and measures across the empire, issuing a stable, unified currency, the Caesarian denarius probably becoming the most trusted coin in the known world, and streamlining the imperial postal service, ensuring messages from Rome could reach distant provinces in record time. The imperial economy becomes profoundly integrated, no longer fragmented by local customs or internal tariffs. It operates as a single, vast economic zone. This fosters specialization. Certain provinces become known for their grain, others for their olive oil, others for their pottery or their minerals. The flow of goods and wealth is immense, stimulating innovation in agriculture, manufacturing, and trade. This economic powerhouse allows Caesar to fund his massive public works, maintain his vast military, and ensure the continued loyalty of his subjects through public handouts and guaranteed employment on state projects. For the average Roman, this means more opportunities, more stability, and generally a better life. You don't have to worry about your crops being burned by marauding armies. You can just worry about your noisy neighbours and whether your kids are doing their Latin homework. A quirky detail that might emerge from this integrated economy and focus on infrastructure is the establishment of a standardised imperial time across the entire empire, perhaps tied to a grand new imperial calendar. This would make coordinating vast projects, military movements, and trade easier, reducing confusion and increasing efficiency. Imagine Roman citizens everywhere setting their sundials by a central time signal, perhaps even a daily blast from a massive horn on the Palatine Hill, just to really drive home the concept of punctuality. Or perhaps Caesar, being a stickler for detail, even commissions an imperial agency to ensure every road sign across the empire uses the exact same font and phrasing, down to the last serif. Historians still debate the precise long-term impact of such pervasive stability on innovation and societal progress. While the Pax Romana of our timeline certainly fostered advancements, some scholars question if such absolute peace, without the creative friction of political competition, might eventually lead to stagnation. Here, however, under the direct and driven leadership of Caesar, it seems to spark a golden age of building and practical application. He's not waiting for debates, he's ordering blueprints. He's not asking for opinions, he's demanding results. The Pax Caesariana also means a significant reduction in the size and frequency of military campaigns within the empire's borders. The legions are still there, vast and powerful, but they are primarily deployed on the frontiers, securing the newly expanded borders, or acting as garrisons to maintain order. The emphasis shifts from conquest to consolidation, from expansion to maintenance. This frees up manpower for agricultural labour, for construction, for all the other productive activities that build an empire. The military itself becomes less an instrument of war and more a guarantor of peace and stability, a visible symbol of Caesar's overwhelming authority. This period of peace and prosperity, extending for decades under Caesar's direct rule, would instill a deep-seated acceptance of monarchy. Generations would grow up knowing only the Pax Caesariana, associating peace and stability directly with the king. The old republican ideals would fade into distant memory, romantic notions from a turbulent past. The Roman Empire, under King Caesar, wouldn't just be an empire by name. It would be an empire that delivered tangible benefits, ensuring the contentment and thus the continued loyalty of its vast and diverse populace. The foundation is laid for centuries of centralized rule, and the very concept of the Roman Empire, as we understand it now, truly takes shape, not through gradual evolution, but by decisive royal decree. With the Pax Caesariana firmly established and the Roman world humming with unprecedented peace and prosperity, King Caesar turns his attention to the deeper, more intangible aspect of imperial rule, the minds and hearts of his subjects. A stable empire requires not just roads and legions, but a unifying ideology, a shared sense of purpose, and, most importantly, a compelling reason to venerate the man at the top. This is where Caesar, ever the showman and astute psychologist, actively promotes an intensified cult of personality and imperial worship. It's not just about loyalty anymore, it's about devotion. He wants his people to not only obey him, but to believe in him, to see him as something more than mortal, like a historical version of a rock star, but with more statues and considerably more power over your life. In our timeline, while Caesar was deified after his death, becoming Divus Julius, the cult of the emperor truly blossomed under Augustus and his successors. Here, with Caesar alive and well, he takes an active, direct role in shaping his own divine image. He's not waiting for death to become a god. He's laying the groundwork for living deification. This isn't a subtle process. It's a meticulously crafted campaign designed to permeate every aspect of Roman life, from the grandest temples to the smallest household shrines. He would commission an astounding number of statues and busts of himself, placed not just in public spaces like the Forum, but in every major city across the empire. These aren't just generic depictions. They are carefully sculpted to emphasize his wisdom, his military prowess, and perhaps even a benign, fatherly quality that belies his ruthless pragmatism. You see his image on every coin, often depicted with symbols of victory or even subtle divine attributes, like a star or an oak wreath. Imagine trying to buy a loaf of bread, and every single coin has Caesar's face staring back at you. It's a constant visual reminder of his omnipresence, like a never-ending advertisement for King Caesar, your benevolent overlord. The Roman state religion is subtly, then overtly, reoriented around his person. Temples are dedicated to Divus Julius, even before his death, perhaps acknowledging his divine destiny or divine nature. And new priestly colleges are established to oversee his worship. Festivals and public games are held in his honour, making devotion to the king an integral part of civic life. Priests might lead public prayers not just to the traditional Roman gods, but to Caesar, invoking his name for bountiful harvests and continued peace. It's a clever move. By intertwining his person with Rome's prosperity, he makes himself indispensable, a living guarantor of their good fortune. This cult of personality isn't just for Rome. It's exported to the provinces. In newly conquered territories, the construction of temples to Caesar might be a primary act of Romanization, symbolizing their incorporation into the imperial system. Local elites would be encouraged, or perhaps subtly coerced, into participating in these cults, demonstrating their loyalty. You might see a Gallic town that once worshipped local deities, now erecting a grand temple to King Caesar, its interior adorned with lavish murals depicting his victories and divine attributes. Some scholars debate the precise psychological impact of imperial worship on the diverse populations of the Roman Empire, questioning whether it truly fostered genuine belief or merely outward compliance. But here, the consistent push from the centre would make it a powerful unifying force. The influence of this imperial worship extends deeply into Roman art and architecture. Public buildings would be adorned with triumphal arches, relief sculptures, and frescoes depicting Caesar's life and accomplishments, portraying him as a legendary figure, perhaps even drawing parallels to mythological heroes like Aeneas or Hercules. New architectural styles might emerge, grander and more monumental, specifically designed to convey the majesty and power of the new monarchy. Think of larger-than-life statues, colossal columns, and forums even grander than those he built in our timeline, all dedicated to the glorification of Caesar and his dynasty. Roman intellectual life also feels the shift. While Caesar was known to be a patron of scholars and poets in our timeline, here the focus is undoubtedly on promoting narratives that glorify his rule and legitimize the new monarchy. Historians would carefully craft their accounts to emphasize Caesar's genius, his divine favor, and the inevitability of his rise. Poets would compose epic verses celebrating his triumphs and the Pax Caesariana. Philosophers might find themselves exploring themes of ideal monarchy, drawing on Greek precedents, but subtly adapting them to fit the Roman context. Those who challenged the official narrative would find their careers and perhaps their lives abruptly cut short. It's a bit like living in a world where every book, every play, every piece of art is subtly, or not so subtly, a tribute to the boss. One quirky tidbit: Caesar, with his characteristic attention to detail, might even oversee the creation of an imperial heralds' college, tasked with composing official hymns, anthems, and even children's rhymes that inculcate imperial loyalty from an early age. Imagine Roman children skipping through the forum, chanting rhymes about great King Caesar, mighty and true, or even learning the official Caesarian salute to be performed upon seeing an imperial dignitary. It's a full-spectrum propaganda effort, ensuring that loyalty to the king isn't just a political act, but a deeply ingrained cultural habit. the long-term effect of this intensified cult of personality would be profound. It would create a much stronger foundation for later emperors, establishing the idea of the ruler as a divine, almost sacred figure, earlier and more firmly than in our timeline. This religious underpinning would contribute to the longevity and stability of the Roman Empire for centuries, binding its diverse peoples not just through law and legions, but through a shared object of worship and reverence. The concept of Rome itself would become inextricably linked with the person of the king, ensuring that future rulers, even if less charismatic than Caesar, would inherit a legacy of divine authority. The Roman world, under King Caesar, truly transitions from a republic to an empire, not just in structure, but in its very soul, with the Roman world unified under a single, unchallenged monarch, and the very concept of kingship woven into the fabric of Roman identity. The gaze of the empire naturally turned outward. But instead of facing formidable existential threats, as Rome often did in our timeline, King Caesar's longevity and absolute control meant a different kind of global dominance. You feel it in the quiet hum of the vast imperial administration, the efficient flow of goods, and the almost eerie silence where the clamour of civil war once echoed. Rome, under Caesar, isn't just a powerful state, it's the undisputed, unchallenged hegemon of the known world, a titan among mere mortals, casting a shadow that stretches from the Scottish Highlands to the deserts of Arabia. It's like being the only kid on the playground, with a super soaker, while everyone else has squirt guns filled with hope and dreams. The reason for this unparalleled dominance is multifaceted. Firstly, the absence of major internal civil wars, which in our timeline constantly drained Rome's resources, manpower, and political will, means that all of the empire's formidable might can be consistently directed externally. Imagine all the legions, all the gold, all the brilliant minds that were once consumed by infighting, now focused on expansion, consolidation, and deterrence. This sustained, unified effort allows Rome to project power on a scale that makes previous Roman conquests look almost hesitant. This isn't just about winning battles. It's about winning the peace by making the cost of challenging Rome utterly unbearable. Rome's influence extends far beyond its direct imperial borders through a network of client states and meticulously enforced treaties. Caesar, being a shrewd diplomat as well as a ruthless conqueror, doesn't always need to annex territory to control it. He secures strategic alliances with kingdoms on his fringes, ensuring they serve as loyal buffers and trade partners. Parthia, having been humbled, likely becomes a subdued, albeit resentful, client state, its rulers effectively puppets of Rome, forced to pay tribute and perhaps even to host Roman garrisons at key choke points. This means a vast area of the Near East, stretching into Central Asia, is now indirectly under Roman sway. The Mediterranean, for centuries, was referred to by Romans as Mare Nostrum, our sea. In our timeline, this was largely aspirational. Here, under King Caesar, it becomes an undeniable reality. His naval power, unchallenged after the decisive victories against Pompey's forces, would be further strengthened and maintained. The Roman fleet, massive and omnipresent, would patrol every shipping lane, eliminating piracy entirely and ensuring the smooth flow of trade. Imagine Roman warships, sleek and fast, ferrying goods from Egypt to Spain, enforcing a kind of nautical pax romana. This means that Rome controls the economic arteries of the ancient world, dictating trade terms and ensuring that virtually all major commerce benefits the imperial capital. Any rival attempting to challenge Rome's economic supremacy would quickly find their ships accidentally sunk by a rogue wave, or perhaps mysteriously boarded by highly organised pirates who oddly resembled Roman marines. This economic hegemony reinforces Rome's political power. The sheer wealth flowing into Rome allows for continued investment in public works, military innovation, and lavish spectacles, all of which solidify the populace's loyalty to the king. The Roman currency, now a stable, universally recognised medium of exchange, becomes the de facto global currency. Traders from distant lands might carry a Roman denarius not just for its intrinsic value, but as a symbol of economic stability and trustworthiness. Culturally, Rome becomes the undeniable centre of the known world, attracting scholars, artists, and craftsmen from every corner of the empire. Latin, already spreading through the West, becomes even more widely adopted as the language of commerce, law, and administration across the entire domain, including the East. Roman law, streamlined and systematised by Caesar's reforms, becomes the gold standard for legal frameworks. This isn't just about conquest, it's about the pervasive, soft power of a truly dominant civilization, where Roman culture, fashion, and even dietary habits begin to influence distant peoples. You might even find a Gaul enjoying some good Italian olive oil, or a Briton learning to appreciate Roman wine, all thanks to King Caesar's sprawling influence. One historical fact that underpins this is that the Mediterranean Sea has always been a focal point for powerful civilizations, and Rome's mastery of it was crucial to its expansion in our timeline. Here, Caesar's personal commitment to a strong navy and efficient trade routes elevates this mastery to an unprecedented level. The lack of major external rivals also means that potential threats like the future Sasanian Persians in the east, or the more formidable Germanic confederations that emerged later in our timeline, might never reach the same level of organised opposition. With Rome occupying larger swathes of Germania earlier, and maintaining a constant military presence, larger barbarian confederations are prevented from forming or are crushed in their infancy. This doesn't mean Rome is entirely without conflict. There will always be border skirmishes and minor rebellions. But the threat of a truly devastating war, one that challenges Rome's very existence, is largely absent for centuries. Scholars still debate whether such a truly unchallenged global dominance would have been sustainable in the long term, or if it would have led to a kind of imperial complacency, stifling innovation or leading to an eventual decline from within, rather than from external pressure. Some argue that constant external pressure in our timeline forced Rome to adapt and evolve, keeping its military and administrative apparatus sharp. Here, with less existential threat, perhaps the Roman military becomes more a police force than a conquering army, and its innovations slow down. But for the immediate centuries under Caesar and his direct successors, this unchallenged dominance offers unparalleled stability and prosperity. A quirky tidbit: perhaps Caesar, ever the visionary, institutes a grand world expo in Rome every few years, inviting merchants and dignitaries from even beyond Rome's direct influence, say from India or even distant China through intermediaries, to showcase their goods and marvel at the technological and cultural prowess of the Roman Empire. This would serve as a powerful propaganda tool, a constant reminder to the outside world of Rome's wealth and superiority, like a giant ancient world's trade fair, complete with gladiatorial games, and perhaps even a very early version of a hot air balloon for a grand spectacle. Behold, you hear a Roman herald proclaim the king's mighty balloon, demonstrating our mastery of the very air itself. Now, who wants to trade silks for some of our magnificent olive oil? This era of peace, backed by overwhelming force, allows Rome to exert an almost gravitational pull on surrounding regions. Neighbouring tribes and kingdoms, seeing the immense benefits of peace and trade under Roman protection, would actively seek to align themselves with Rome, perhaps even requesting to become client states or allies. This soft power, combined with the hard power of Caesar's legions, ensures that Rome's influence continues to expand, not just through conquest, but through the sheer magnetic attraction of its stability and prosperity. The Roman Empire, under King Caesar, truly becomes the enduring global superpower, a beacon of order and might in a world otherwise prone to chaos. And this unchallenged status sets the stage for a uniquely long and transformative reign. You've witnessed the Roman Empire blossom into an unparalleled global superpower under King Caesar, a realm of unprecedented peace and prosperity, stretching from the misty shores of Britannia to the sun-baked plains of Mesopotamia. But this isn't just a temporary golden age. It's a fundamental, irreversible shift in the very nature of Roman governance. Caesar's long and unchallenged rule, extending for decades after his near assassination, doesn't just build an empire. It creates a precedent for absolute hereditary monarchy that forever alters the trajectory of Roman governance and legal structures. It's like rewriting the operating system of an entire civilization, replacing a quirky, sometimes crashing democratic system with a sleek, authoritarian, but incredibly stable one. The old republic.exe file is corrupted beyond repair, and now you're running Monarchy Ultimate Edition. Think about it. In our timeline, even the most powerful emperors, like Augustus, were careful to maintain the pretense of the Republic. They were princeps, first citizens, not kings. The Senate still met, laws were theoretically passed by various assemblies, and the fiction of shared power persisted, however thinly veiled, for centuries. This respect for republican traditions was a deeply ingrained part of Roman identity. But here, King Caesar, having faced down the very institutions he was ostensibly meant to respect, sheds all pretense. His reign is a direct, undeniable declaration of absolute authority, cemented not just by military might, but by the sheer passage of time and the palpable benefits of his rule. For generations, Romans grow up knowing only a world governed by a king. The idea of elected magistrates, of a powerful independent senate, or of the popular assemblies holding real sway fades into distant memory, becoming quaint historical anecdotes, like listening to your great-grandparents tell stories about rotary phones and VHS tapes. All major offices, the consulship, the praetorship, the governorships of provinces, are now appointments made directly by the king. You don't campaign for them, you receive them as a sign of royal favour, a reward for loyalty and efficiency. This means that careers in public service are entirely dependent on pleasing the monarch, fostering a culture of obedience rather than independent initiative or republican virtue. It's less about serving Rome, and more about serving the King of Rome. The legal structures undergo a similar, profound transformation. Roman law, in our timeline, was a complex, evolving beast, shaped by senatorial decrees, praetorian edicts, and the rulings of various assemblies. Here, the king becomes the supreme lawgiver. His edicts, issued from the imperial palace, carry the force of absolute law, immediately binding on every citizen and subject across the vast empire. There's no messy legislative process, no protracted debates, no need for popular ratification. It's a top-down system, efficient and immediate. Imagine waking up to a new royal decree about, say, the acceptable length of sandals, published and enforced across the entire empire by sundown. Suddenly, everyone's foot fashion is standardized, whether they like it or not. This centralization of law also leads to its standardization across the empire. While local customs and laws might persist in some areas, the overarching framework is Roman imperial law, directly derived from the king's will. This ensures a degree of legal consistency and predictability that was often lacking in the more fragmented republican system. Justice, while still administered locally, becomes more directly accountable to the central authority, with imperial judges and courts overseeing the provincial systems. This creates a powerful, unified legal system, simplifying administration but also concentrating immense power in the hands of the monarch. One established historical fact is that Roman law, especially in its later imperial phases, did become increasingly centralized and codified under emperors. However, the rapidity and totality of this shift under a living Caesar, rather than a gradual evolution after his death, is the key divergence here. The corpus juris civilis, the great body of Roman law that later formed the basis of many European legal systems, might have its origins much earlier, perhaps even initiated by Caesar himself. A truly comprehensive legal code bearing his name, simplifying every aspect of Roman legal life, from property disputes to criminal penalties. This shift creates a strong precedent for hereditary succession. Caesar isn't just a powerful individual, he is the founder of a dynasty. The careful grooming of his chosen heir, whether Octavian or another, ensures a smooth transition of power upon his eventual natural death. This prevents the power vacuums and bloody civil wars that plagued our timeline's imperial successions. Future rulers, inheriting the throne, do so not by military might or political manoeuvring, but by birthright or clear, direct designation from the previous monarch. The idea of a strong, stable, unquestioned succession becomes paramount, replacing the chaotic jostling for power that defined the late Republic. It's a simple rule. The crown passes from one Caesar to the next. No arguing, no fighting. Unless, of course, you really enjoy spending your days getting very familiar with Roman prison architecture. Scholars still debate whether such an absolute hereditary system would have ultimately been more resilient or more brittle in the long term compared to the more flexible, though often chaotic, Republican Principate model of our timeline. Some argue that without the regular testing of leaders in a competitive environment, even a controlled one, the quality of future rulers might decline, leading to long periods of stagnation under less capable monarchs. But here, the system is designed by a genius, and its initial success is undeniable. A quirky tidbit that might emerge from this hyper-centralized legal system is the creation of a massive imperial law library, possibly housed in a dedicated building in Rome, where every single royal edict, every judicial ruling, and every new commentary is meticulously catalogued and cross-referenced. This would be a bureaucratic marvel, perhaps overseen by a newly established chief imperial archivist, whose sole job is to ensure every piece of paper is perfectly organised, even inventing a primitive form of indexing or colour coding to keep track of the thousands of royal decrees. The librarian would probably be a very powerful, very stressed out individual. The enduring legacy of Caesar's long rule is the complete redefinition of Roman political identity. The Republic is no longer a cherished ideal, it's a bygone era, an historical curiosity. Roman pride is now centred not on civic participation or a shared public res publica, but on the king and the sheer scale and stability of his empire. Loyalty to the monarch becomes the supreme virtue. This creates a state far more resilient to internal fragmentation, but perhaps less flexible in its ability to adapt to unforeseen challenges from the outside. The very foundation of Roman governance, once resting on a delicate balance of powers and traditions, now rests solely on the absolute, unchallengeable will of the king, passed down through a clearly defined dynastic line, ensuring the Roman Empire's uniquely long and stable trajectory for centuries to come. Under the prolonged, iron-fisted stability of King Caesar, the Roman Empire isn't just expanding its borders and solidifying its governance, it's also subtly yet powerfully accelerating its technological and scientific progress. You might not immediately think of the Romans as great innovators in the same vein as, say, the Renaissance, but they were master engineers and pragmatists. Here, with a unified, centrally funded empire and a leader who valued practical results, Rome's already impressive capabilities are pushed even further, unburdened by internal strife or constant resource diversion. It's like taking a highly efficient but somewhat limited ancient Roman computer and upgrading it with an entirely new, unlimited power source, and an obsessed CEO who demands constant upgrades. In our timeline, Roman engineering achievements were immense: aqueducts, roads, concrete, siege engines. But many innovations were driven by immediate military necessity or practical needs, and widespread scientific theory often lagged behind Greek scholarship. Here, with Caesar's direct patronage and the sheer scale of the Pax Caesariana, investment in what we'd call R&D would be unparalleled. The vast wealth flowing in from the east, combined with the absence of debilitating civil wars, means there are immense funds available for large-scale projects and dedicated research. Imagine Caesar, perhaps intrigued by a new water pump design for his aqueducts, instructing his engineers to make it bigger, make it faster, and make sure it has a really dramatic splash. One area where this acceleration would be immediately visible is in construction and civil engineering. With the drive to build new roads, bridges, and cities across a vast empire, Roman concrete, already revolutionary, would be further refined. Perhaps they discover an even stronger, faster setting mix, or develop techniques for pouring larger, more complex structures. We might see larger domed buildings, more complex arches, and even multi-story structures that push the limits of their architectural understanding. The construction industry would be booming, constantly experimenting with new methods to build faster and more efficiently. You might even see the widespread use of cranes, operated by more advanced systems of pulleys and winches, making the building of monumental structures even more awe-inspiring. Military technology, always a Roman strength, would also see significant advancements. While Rome is largely unchallenged, Caesar, ever cautious, would invest heavily in improving legions' equipment, siege weaponry, and naval vessels. Perhaps they developed more advanced ballistas and onagers, capable of greater range and destructive power. New forms of armour, lighter yet stronger, might be introduced. Naval architecture could see breakthroughs in ship design for both combat and rapid transport, allowing for even faster projection of power across the Mediterranean and beyond. Imagine Roman engineers hunched over blueprints, trying to figure out how to put an even bigger, more explosive projectile into a catapult, fueled by Caesar's demand for more bang for your buck. Beyond the practical, there could be an acceleration in more theoretical sciences. With a stable empire and wealthy patrons, scholars might find themselves with unprecedented support to pursue fields like astronomy, medicine, and even rudimentary physics. Caesar, a highly educated man himself, would likely encourage this. Perhaps imperial observatories are established, leading to more accurate mapping of stars and planets, improving navigation and calendar keeping. Medical research, driven by the needs of a vast army and urban population, might see advances in surgical techniques, hygiene, and pharmacology. You could imagine Roman doctors, no longer content with leeches and incantations, beginning to conduct more systematic studies of anatomy and disease, perhaps even leading to early forms of public health campaigns in major cities. One quirky tidbit could be Caesar's personal interest in timekeeping. Being a man obsessed with organisation and punctuality, and having already reformed the calendar, the Julian calendar, he might sponsor research into more precise timekeeping devices. Perhaps this leads to the invention of more accurate water clocks, clepsydra, that are self-regulating, or even rudimentary mechanical devices that, while not truly clocks, offer a consistent measure of time across the empire for military coordination and civil administration. He might even appoint an imperial regulator of time, whose sole job is to ensure every public sundial is perfectly aligned and every water clock accurately calibrated, perhaps leading to a thriving underground market for slightly inaccurate timekeeping devices for those who prefer a little extra leisure time. This isn't to say Rome would invent steam engines or microchips, but the cumulative effect of constant improvement, backed by immense imperial resources and a demanding monarch, would push the boundaries of ancient technology significantly. The Roman Empire would become a hub of practical innovation, attracting the best minds from across the known world. The intellectual stagnation that some scholars debate as a characteristic of later periods in our timeline's Roman Empire might be considerably delayed or even averted here, precisely because the central authority actively promotes and funds such endeavours. The economic impact of these innovations would be enormous. More efficient farming techniques, new methods for mining and processing raw materials, and faster transportation would all contribute to greater wealth and prosperity for the empire as a whole. This creates a virtuous cycle. Prosperity funds innovation, which in turn fuels further prosperity. The Roman Empire, under King Caesar, would be a powerhouse of both military might and practical advancement, making it an even more formidable and long-lasting entity. This commitment to advancement, driven by a truly centralized and absolute monarch, ensures that Rome remains at the cutting edge of ancient technology and knowledge for centuries. The Roman Empire here isn't just surviving, it's thriving and pushing the boundaries of what's possible in the ancient world, becoming a beacon of practical ingenuity that continues to shape the world long after Caesar's long and glorious reign draws to a close. His legacy isn't just in conquest and governance, but in building a civilization that continually sought to improve and innovate, a true testament to the power of a unified vision. You've journeyed through decades of a Roman Empire utterly transformed, ruled by an unchallenged King Caesar who cemented absolute power, expanded Rome's dominion across continents, and ushered in an unprecedented era of peace, prosperity, and innovation. Now, after what would be a truly extraordinary decades-long reign, the time comes for the inevitable. But unlike the abrupt, violent end in our timeline that plunged Rome into civil war, here, Caesar's departure from the world stage is entirely different. It's a peaceful transition, carefully managed, planned, and executed, precisely as he had meticulously orchestrated. It's like watching a perfectly choreographed passing of the baton in a relay race, rather than a sudden, tragic tripping at the finish line. Imagine Caesar, now an old man, perhaps in his late 70s, or even early 80s. His body might be frail, his famed energy diminished, but his mind, ever sharp, remains fully engaged. He has ruled for a phenomenal period, far longer than most Roman emperors in our timeline. He has achieved everything he set out to do, and then some. The empire is stable, unified, and prosperous. His dynasty is secure. He has built a legacy that will span centuries, arguably millennia. There is no urgency, no unfinished business that would lead to a desperate last-minute gamble. The old joke about Roman emperors often dying in bed, but usually someone else's, is true for many, but not for Caesar in this timeline. He dies in his own, probably a very comfortable, very large, and very imperial one. His passing is not a sudden, shocking event, but a gradual, anticipated transition. For perhaps years, his designated heir, let's assume it's a mature, well-prepared Octavian, or perhaps even a successor chosen after Octavian, if Caesar lived truly exceptionally long, would have been increasingly involved in the day-to-day governance of the empire. Caesar would have systematically delegated responsibilities, allowing the heir to gain experience, build relationships with key military commanders and provincial governors, and prove his capabilities to the Roman people. This isn't a test, it's a systematic transfer of power, ensuring continuity. The news of his death, when it finally comes, would be met with profound mourning across the empire, but not panic or political instability. Public mourning would be widespread and genuine, as generations had known only the peace and prosperity of the Pax Caesariana. There would be lavish state funerals, elaborate ceremonies, and public deification, ensuring his place among the gods. This isn't the conflicted deification of our timeline. It's a seamless, universally accepted acknowledgement of his divine status, the founder of a true imperial line. The most crucial aspect of this peaceful transition is the prevention of the chaotic civil wars that plagued our timeline after his assassination. There is no power vacuum. There are no rival claimants to the throne. The succession is clear, established by law and tradition under Caesar's direct guidance. The legions, meticulously loyal to the king and his designated heir, remain unified. There's no incentive for ambitious generals to raise their own armies and challenge the succession, because the legitimacy of the new ruler is undeniable, backed by the will of the revered founder of the dynasty and the overwhelming force of the empire itself. The old adage of might makes right is still true, but now Might is firmly on the side of the established order. Scholars still debate the precise mechanisms of peaceful succession in ancient monarchies, and whether a system dependent on a single personality, even a charismatic one, could truly endure without eventual internal strife. But here, Caesar's long reign gives him the unique opportunity to build a system so robust, so ingrained, that it transcends his individual person. He builds not just a monarchy, but the very idea of a Roman monarchy that is self-sustaining. The established historical fact that in our timeline, despite Caesar's achievements, his assassination led to years of bloody conflict underscores the profound impact of his survival here. His death in this alternate reality will be a moment of respectful transition, not a spark of chaos. The vast resources and institutions built during his reign would seamlessly pass to his successor, ensuring that Rome's momentum continues unimpeded. A quirky tidbit that might emerge from this peaceful transition is the creation of a massive, perpetual flame in Rome, perhaps in a newly built Temple of the Divine Caesar, that burns continuously from the moment of his death, symbolizing the eternal flame of the Caesarian dynasty and the everlasting peace he brought. Imagine Roman citizens, centuries later, still making pilgrimages to this flame, a visible reminder of the founder of their long-lived empire. Or perhaps Caesar, meticulous to the very end, even commissions a detailed instruction manual for his successor, outlining every aspect of imperial governance, from tax collection to troop deployment, ensuring his legacy of efficiency extends beyond his lifetime. A Caesar's guide to running the empire, basically. This smooth, prepared succession ensures that the Roman Empire continues its trajectory of centralized rule, unchallenged dominance, and cultural influence. The Roman people, having experienced such extended peace and prosperity under Caesar, would have an even deeper commitment to the imperial system. The memory of the chaotic republic would fade further into the mist of time, replaced by the enduring narrative of the glorious Caesarian dynasty. His death isn't an end, but a punctuation mark, signifying the successful completion of his grand design and the beginning of a truly stable, long-lasting Roman Empire, one that profoundly reshapes the subsequent development of Europe and the world. The world, in essence, breathes a collective sigh of relief, not because a tyrant is gone, but because the architect of their peace has ensured his vision will live on. You've witnessed the grand sweep of history diverge, a single moment rewriting the fate of an empire, and, by extension, the world. The survival of Julius Caesar, the man who was meant to fall on the Ides of March, didn't just delay an assassination. It birthed a Roman Empire so fundamentally different from the one we know, it's almost unrecognisable. This isn't just a slightly different timeline, it's a whole new branch on the tree of human civilization, affecting everything from language to law, from technology to political philosophy. It's like finding out your favourite band didn't break up, and they went on to release 20 more albums, completely changing music history. Firstly, the Roman Empire itself would be far more cohesive and centralised from its inception. Our timeline's empire, under Augustus, was a carefully constructed principate, a delicate balance of new imperial power and lingering republican traditions. This often led to internal tensions, power struggles, and civil wars during successions. But here, King Caesar's brutal suppression of the Senate, his explicit embrace of monarchy, and his meticulously planned succession created a truly unified and authoritarian state from day one. This initial coherence would mean fewer internal conflicts, allowing Rome to dedicate its immense resources to expansion, administration and stability for a far longer period. The empire wouldn't be battling itself, it would be presenting a united front to the world, like a perfectly oiled, incredibly disciplined war machine, or perhaps a really, really well-organised bureaucracy that never loses your paperwork. This enhanced cohesion and lack of civil wars would undeniably contribute to a longer-lasting Roman Empire. The internal strife of our timeline, the constant drain of civil wars that bled Rome dry and weakened its frontiers, would be largely absent. Imagine the centuries of stability, the continuous Pax Caesariana extending not just for decades, but for hundreds of years. This allows for deeper Romanization of conquered territories, more pervasive integration of different peoples, and a more robust economic system. The empire wouldn't face the same pressures that led to its eventual division and collapse in the West. Its sheer size and unified structure would make it incredibly resilient to external threats. You wouldn't hear about the Western Roman Empire falling. You'd hear about the King of Rome's legions marching to quell a minor border dispute in, say, the 10th century AD. The development of Europe and the world would be profoundly reshaped. Latin, already the lingua franca of the Roman Empire, would become even more dominant. With deeper Romanization of Germania, the linguistic map of Europe would look vastly different. Perhaps a Germanic Latin language emerges, or the Germanic languages as we know them are entirely supplanted by Latin, leading to a much larger, more uniform Romance language family across the continent. English, as we know it, would probably be unrecognisable, a linguistic anomaly, if it even existed. Imagine ordering a beer in Berlin in a dialect of Latin, cerveza per favor. The legal systems of future European states will be almost entirely derived from Caesarian imperial law, not the more varied influences seen in our timeline. The explicit, top-down nature of Caesar's legal reforms would provide a clearer, more centralised foundation for legal codes, perhaps preventing the fragmented feudal legal systems that emerged in the early medieval period in our history. The very concept of sovereignty and the role of the state would be permanently framed by Caesar's absolute monarchy. There's no argument about whether power flows from the people. It flows from the king. Culturally, the influence of Rome would be far more pervasive and enduring. The Pax Caesariana would foster continuous artistic, architectural and intellectual exchange. The Roman way of life, its technologies, its engineering prowess, would be more widely adopted across Europe and the Mediterranean. Instead of seeing a gradual decline of classical knowledge in the early medieval period, there might be a continuous, unbroken thread of learning and advancement, perhaps even leading to earlier scientific revolutions. Imagine Roman scholars using refined optical instruments, perhaps even building rudimentary calculating machines, all funded by the ceaseless imperial budget, because Caesar wanted to know the exact square footage of every single imperial grain silo. One established historical fact is that the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD had a profound and lasting impact on the development of Europe, leading to the fragmentation and decentralization of power. Here, with no such collapse, the trajectory of European history would be utterly different. There would be no dark ages as we understand them, but a continuation of Roman imperial rule, perhaps with periods of prosperity and occasional challenges, but never a complete breakdown of centralized authority. The spread of Christianity would also be drastically altered. In our timeline, Christianity grew within the Roman Empire, eventually becoming its state religion. Here, the pervasive cult of imperial worship, established firmly by Caesar himself, might offer a formidable ideological challenge to early Christianity. While it might still spread, its development would be different, perhaps facing a longer, more systematic suppression, or being forced to adapt and integrate with the imperial cult in ways we cannot imagine. The Christian Church, without the power vacuum of a collapsed empire to grow into, might never achieve the same institutional power or political influence it did in our history. Imagine Caesar's successor, perhaps a century after him, looking at the fledgling Christian movement and simply issuing a decree to nicely ask them to stop, please, or face mandatory conscription into the imperial bricklaying division. A quirky detail that might emerge is the widespread adoption of a specific Roman fashion trends across the globe due to the empire's pervasive influence. Perhaps the toga, instead of dying out, becomes a universal garment, adapted with regional flair. A tartan toga in Britannia, a silk toga in Parthia, but always recognisable as a symbol of Roman connection. Or maybe Caesar, with his obsession for order, even establishes an imperial decree for standardised dining etiquette, ensuring that every Roman subject, from the humblest farmer to the richest merchant, knows exactly which fork to use for the peacock brain. Scholars still debate whether an empire of such immense size and centralised power could truly maintain its dynamism and avoid eventual stagnation or overstretch. Some argue that without the competition of rival states or the constant need for internal adaptation, even a well-run empire might eventually become sclerotic. But the initial centuries under Caesar's heirs would likely be defined by a continued era of peace and unprecedented prosperity, making the hypothetical decline a very distant theoretical concern. The world we live in, the languages we speak, the laws we follow, the very political philosophies we grapple with, are all shaped by the Roman Empire's collapse and its subsequent, fragmented re-emergence. Here, that fundamental turning point never happens. The Roman Empire, under the enduring legacy of King Caesar, remains a unified, powerful, and deeply influential force, shaping a human civilization that is more centralized, more uniform, and arguably more stably governed for centuries. The echoes of his decision to survive, and his unwavering belief in his own absolute authority, would resonate through the ages, creating a truly altered reality that makes you wonder just how thin the veil between our world and countless others truly is. As the echoes of Caesar's empire fade, let your mind drift from the marble halls and bustling forums. The scent of Roman concrete and exotic spices, the distant clatter of legionary armour, all recede now. The vast plains, the deep forests, the endless seas of this alternate Rome begin to soften at the edges, blurring into the gentle darkness that gathers around you. Feel the quiet hush settle, the lingering visions of a world both familiar and profoundly alien slowly dissolving. The weight of what if lifts, replaced by the soft current of your breath, the gentle rhythm of your own heart. All those grand emperors, all those sweeping reforms, all those tireless legions are now just whispers in the ancient wind, fading as sleep draws closer. The immense possibilities of history The countless threads that could have been are vast and comforting in their silence. Just close your eyes and let the quiet take you.